Alessandro Michele for Valentino, Valentino-Michele style, Gucci at Valentino, this most recent Spring-Summer 2025 Valentino collection by the new creative director Alessandro Michele was probably one of the runway shows a lot of people were waiting for. It was also one of the runway shows which polarized most. Some people loved it. They say Michele is exactly what the brand Valentino needed. They said the 1970s elements that Michele is very famous for also worked really well with the Valentino archives. Others took exactly that, the references of the archives and also this Michele style as a criticism. They said it's too much Michele for Valentino. So as you can see, there has already been a lot of discussion and there will be a lot of discussion during his time at Valentino. And I also really look forward to our discussion here. Let me know in the comments below what you thought about this particular collection and what you're thinking about Alessandro Michele at Valentino. Is it a successful match or is it really too much Gucci or Michele style at Valentino? I really look forward to this discussion. And just as a side note here, this is a non-sponsored video. I'm just sharing my personal opinion and my research here. Alessandro Michele became known for his work at Gucci. He has a very distinct design language, which very often takes references from the 1970s. He's also known for his rather extreme way of styling, also for incorporating many accessories. So in financial terms and also branding wise, it was a very smart move by Gucci to hire Alessandro Michele because he had this distinct design language and he also managed to promote also the leather goods, the accessories that Gucci is famous for, and they are a major driver for their revenue. But also for Michele, the context changed. When he started to work at Gucci, he was a relatively unknown designer and he had kind of this playing field and people did not really know yet what to expect. And over time, he showed everyone his design language, his aesthetics, and also he turned himself into a brand. You have probably seen this picture of him and Jared Leto where they both showed up as twins. So even people outside of the industry probably have heard of Alessandro Michele. So this is also a different expectation then, now that he has joined Valentino. A lot of people will look at the designs and say like, oh, is this really successful? Is this Valentino? Is this Michele? Is this too much of Gucci? Do we really like it? So it's a very different starting point, we could say, at Valentino than it was for him at Gucci. I personally very often struggle with his extreme way of styling. I find it a bit too much and I find it too distracting. Very often there were designs that were beautiful on their own, for example dresses, but because there was this overload of accessories and sometimes also this extreme way of styling like beanies and all that stuff, you didn't really see it anymore, and I think this is a shame. I know why he does it. On the one hand, it is his aesthetics, but also it's a way to sell many things. But at the same time, I find this a bit too much, and this will also be my biggest criticism of the show overall. I think it was quite a good show. Some people say he played it safe. I'm not sure if he really played it safe because you can still see it was his design aesthetics, a lot of things that we have already seen at Gucci, for example the 1970s patterns, but they were not only his design language, he also referenced the Valentino archives. Of course, we can also say just referencing the archives is nothing special because this is part of any designer's education. They have to study the archives, also recreate and reinterpret the items, but it's always how they are brought to the contemporary style. And one criticism that I have in general here, this collection involved more than 80 or close to 90 outfits or looks. And while for me it was quite a bit to scroll through all the pictures, I find this a bit strange. In the past, Valentino announced that there will be fewer collections. So I thought, okay, they are moving towards more sustainability, away from this craziness of the fashion industry that they have to produce so many collections per year. But if you then reduce the collections, but I also don't know to how many collections they will actually reduce the number to, and then you have one collection with, I think it was 86 looks, it also kind of dilutes down this message. So I would say that some of these garments or some of these looks we could have been spared. Some were a bit boring or we did not really understand them. I would have appreciated a bit less so that we can also focus more on the individual garments or accessories, but yes, we know in the end the fashion industry needs to sell, so of course they wanted to squeeze as much as they can into one collection. And this is also something where I think this may have been the reason why they hired Michele. Maybe Valentino wants to push more the accessories also, because the leather goods and the accessories are very often where the brands make the money. So this might be the reason also for this typical Michele overload in styling also here at Valentino. I also want to give you some background about this particular video. I saw quite a few clips on Instagram, and also I read quite a few articles that talked about this runway show, and then very often they said there were many Valentino-isms in there and that's why it was successful and that was it. I know very often these are clips that are not longer than 1 minute, but then I was sitting there thinking, well, what Valentino-isms did you see? Because first of all, there were quite a few, and second of all, does everybody who watches these videos or reads these articles know what a Valentino-ism really is? I personally don't like it when people assume a lot of other people, or they raise their eyebrows when you don't know something. I think we should not be ashamed to ask questions. There are no stupid questions. I don't think that everybody knows which archival reference was in which outfit. I sometimes even assume that even the people who sometimes say, oh, they knew, they didn't know about it. So as I said, I don't want anyone to feel left out. I experience this very often in the fashion industry or also in the art sector, that there are these groups and they have their views and they know everything about art, and if you dare to ask the wrong question, you get the eyebrows or you're not invited anymore. So I don't really like this approach. I want people to be interested in art and fashion, and I want to have a discussion, and not everyone knows everything. There will be things from the archives that I overlooked and you may have noticed them. Then please let me know in the comments below. It's no shame to say, okay, I just didn't know about this or I didn't see that. I want to have a very open discussion here. I want to introduce you to the archives of Valentino, and I want to have a discussion about this collection that is also based on, let's say, facts or more objective things than just looking at it and dismissing it as this is Michele, that's why I don't like it. So one reason for this lack of explanation may be that a lot of people who work in the industry, they know about it and they assume that other people know it too. This is just a way how they perceive everything, and it's not really a criticism, it's just the fact that this sometimes happens to us, that we don't see that other people have a different level. And the other reason may be that it is also a lot of work to do this research. Analyzing 86 runway looks and then also digging into online archives, pictures, and finding the references takes a lot of time. And I think in times of TikTok, Instagram, information that has to be available very, very fast, a lot of people don't have the time anymore, or they don't want to invest it to do that research. So I thought, okay, I'm not scared of the research. I also invest a lot of time in my videos. So I wanted to do this for you, that I dissect these looks and then we can discuss together, is this a reference? What did it look like and what does it represent in the context of Valentino and also Alessandro Michele? Now let's dive into all these Valentino-isms that Alessandro Michele may or may have not taken up in this collection. And let's start with the most obvious one, the Valentino-Red. You may have seen this shade because if you have seen Valentino designs, the red was always a signature part of his collections, and it actually all started in 1959 with a dress called La Fiesta. And from then onwards, this kick started a very successful characteristic of the brand. It actually comes or may come from the poppy flowers that Valentino very often referenced in his designs. I talked about this in my other video about Zendaya and her collaboration with Valentino, where she also wore one of these vintage 1970s dresses with poppy flowers on them. And today this shade of red is simply called Valentino-Red. So it is something which is inextricably linked with Valentino Garavani. There was even a book that came out which was called Valentino Rosso, which was dedicated to all of these designs in this shade of red. I also really like the story of how Valentino himself discovered red as a very beautiful color for him. He said that he went to the opera frequently with his father and they watched a production of Georges Bizet's Carmen. And then he said all the women were dressed in red, all the details on the stage were in red. It was such an intense experience and color for him that he had to take it up. And he actually said that after black and white, red is one of the most important or beautiful colors. And we may see a link here. I also said this in my video about Coco Chanel. She actually had the same view. For her it was black, white, and then also red. So I find this link really interesting. And also Valentino incorporated red in his last collection. When he said goodbye using Valentino-Red. And also the creative directors who followed him, Alessandro Facchinetti, Maria Grazia Chiuri, and Pierpaolo Piccoli as a team, but then also Pierpaolo Piccoli, all of them took up this Valentino-Red in their collections and designs. And now we have Michele using this Valentino-Red, and I have to say it was in obvious forms in the dresses, but also he incorporated it in accessories, for example headpieces. And I have to say the two dresses that I spotted, or two ensembles, one may also be a top and a skirt, I'm not so sure about this, I actually really like them because in general I like red, I like the Valentino red, and I also liked the cut of these dresses. It was very much Valentino, but it was also a bit 1970s, it was classic, and it is also Alessandro Michele, so this was already something that I particularly liked. One thing I noticed during this past fashion month is that workwear is back on the runway, and I very much appreciate this because I do hope that the fashion industry has woken up and sees that we don't only sit at home and work, or that we only wear athleisure. We may want something tailored even for casual wear or especially for work. So I really appreciate that there are more options in the collections again. And one example from this Valentino collection was look number 59. It was a very beautifully cut blazer in this Valentino red with black details. It looks really smart, it looks really cool. I think it works for casual and professional wear, even though in many industries, especially as a woman, you're very often told, if you work in finance, for example, or in law, don't wear red, it's too aggressive, people will not like you. I actually very much like wearing red, so I really like to see that blazer in red. It is the signature 1980s power suit, which we have seen also at other collections, for example at Yves Saint Laurent during this past fashion month. I really appreciate the return of workwear and that there's a bigger focus on it, and as I said, it's the signature 1980s shape, and this is one detail of this Michele collection. He referenced the 60s, 70s, 80s, a bit of the 90s also. So this is something that is very clear, especially in the suits. And this brings me to another Valentino-ism, and this was the cuts and shapes of the dresses. The dresses looked very romantic. They had sometimes the long puffy sleeves. Everything was very flowing. And when you look at them, you immediately see the 1970s. And a lot of people took this up and said, oh, this is Michele again, but it's actually also Valentino from the 1970s. When you look at the archival dresses by Valentino in the 1970s, you see these shapes, you see the ruffles and all these details, these very flowing dresses. Also, this dress that I mentioned before with the poppy flowers has this shape. I think it's a very nice shape to take up. Also, Michele took it up for these purple designs with the floral patterns. So here we see not only the shapes of the 1970s, but also the florals. Florals is another thing which was very often used by Valentino. He loved them in many different shapes and forms. And I do think that these florals are quite interesting. I'm usually not a big fan of purple, but then in combination with the other colors, it looks quite fun, a bit eclectic. Maybe for me it's too much fall, winter, not so much spring, summer, but who says we can't wear dark colors? And especially these designs, these purple designs or these dresses with the floral patterns are the outfits where you can look at them and dissect them, because at first they look like a lot with all these accessories and the excessive styling, and then you really have to take them apart. And the purple may also be a reference of one of these typical 1970s dresses which was modeled by Jerry Hall, for example. And speaking of the floral signatures of Michele and Valentino, when you zoom in on some of the dresses, you see these delicate flower prints. I think it was prints, it may also have been embroidery, but I think for ready to wear it's probably more prints. It also reminded me of some of Valentino's designs from the 1970s, where you had these flowers on them that looked painted. So I think this was quite a lovely reference. I think if we overlook that heavy styling, these dresses look really nice, really romantic, very summery, so this is definitely something I liked. And then all of these dresses, they have ruffles, they have flounces, and it's a very close reference also to the Valentino archives. I found one black dress with these like kind of ruffles, which reminded me of a sister dress from 1977, also in black. So you can see the reference there, and some of these dresses were also heavily embellished, which is Michele and also Valentino. I was actually surprised to see these embellishments because this is a ready-to-wear collection, not an haute couture collection. So I'm really looking forward to see what Michele will do for his haute couture collection. There's this one example with the embellishments. When you look at it, it immediately gives you not only 1970s, it also gives you Michele. And also look at the rim, at the lower rim of the skirt, you see these details. It could be fake fur or feathers, and this is also a reference to Valentino and the archives. Valentino incorporated these trims very often in his designs, especially in the 1970s. This was an overall trend also in fashion to have these trims. And again, looking at these archival pieces, we can see the floral details, the embellishments, especially the color combinations that Michele also very often took up. And very often we can then mistake them as Michele, or we can say it's only Valentino. And I think this is an overall difficulty that a lot of people will have with this collection, that it is this mix of 1970s, Michele, Valentino, and we can actually see what we want to see. Maybe it's like this Rorschach test that it also reflects, we want to see Michele, then we say it's Michele. We want to see Valentino, it's Valentino. We want to see 70s, and it's 70s, and so on. I don't know, this is just one way of thinking about this, but this is very clear where Michele also got his inspiration from. Let's also analyze look 5. I found quite a few archival pieces which could have served as a source of inspiration. Some dresses, also some garments on resale platforms. So the reference is very clear. The only thing that I struggle with here is, again, the styling and the accessories. This headpiece I really don't like. I don't like the hair. I also don't like the makeup. And I think a lot of them looked bored or even sick. I'm sorry if I put it like this. I hope nobody gets upset by this. But I think the makeup was not really great. I don't understand why models in general, this is not only a criticism of Michele, but runway shows in general, why do they always have to look miserable, bored? Why can't they be happy? It's fashion, it's beautiful garments. This is something that I don't understand about the industry. And one other thing which I would like to raise here, this is not only about the Michele for Valentino show, but in general about this past fashion month. I think there was a real lack in diversity in body shapes. I have seen past fashion months where I thought, okay, now they are finally making a move in terms of body shapes, that we see more, but in the end, most of the models that I saw this fashion months were very, very slim, sometimes extremely slim, and this is something that I would criticize about this fashion month. And I also saw this, unfortunately, with Valentino here. I already showed this look 28 before when I discussed the embellishments, and I would like to draw your attention to the ruffled collar. This is again another signature reference to the archives of Valentino, because Valentino himself also loved these ruffled collars, and these were incorporated in Michele's collection, this time in many different ways and also colors. These ruffled collars go back to the 1960s already, and very often Valentino incorporated them in black and white. So we again see how much he liked this black and white combination, let's put it like this. And this black and white reference is not only taken up in the collars, it's also reflected in look 39, for example, where we have this interesting blazer with the black details. And this white also links to the 1970s, one of Valentino's muses in the 1970s, and also to Zendaya. in the present day. Because there's this very famous picture when Marisa Berenson was photographed in New York City in a white design by Valentino, and everything is kind of whitish, and this was referenced by Zendaya recently. And then I found another archival design on Berenson, which may also have been referenced by Michele. I'm not sure if I'm taking it too far, but maybe the skirt elements reference also the 1970s and this very famous outfit. This outfit was not only worn by Marisa Berenson, it actually made international headlines at the time when Jacqueline Kennedy married Aristotle Onassis. She wore this white Valentino ensemble. And another detail on this Berenson picture is the tights. Look at the laces, look at the patterns, and this is something which Michele took up in this collection. There were a lot of these lace tights in white, in black, in red. Again, these three Valentino colors that he referenced. I really like those because it's a very smart reference with the colors. Valentino loved lace designs, and also I personally love these kind of crazy tights because it makes it much more fun to wear tights in fall and winter. So maybe I did not like it how it was styled in the Michele style, but I think the tights themselves are a very nice reference. So we can already see archival Valentino is also very romantic, the florals, the shapes, the laces, and what else is very romantic? Bows. And bows are a signature element of Valentino as well, and they were everywhere in this collection. They were on blazers, on dresses, on the accessories. Very often I like them because it's just Valentino and it makes it just look nice. Some of the looks were okay, but I'm not a big fan of, for example, look 1 and look 61. They were a bit too schoolgirl uniform for me, but I really liked the bows on the blazers. And in general, the blazers was something that I really liked in this collection, and I think these blazers just looked really cool and smart, so I liked it on this single tone blazer, and then you have the bow in front as a detail. I also liked the polka dot blazers, and another detail that we can see with these blazers is the signature neckline. By Valentino, there are quite a few archival pieces, not necessarily blazers, but very often dresses, where we can see this shape of the neckline and then it leads to this bow. So I actually think this was one of the smartest references because it was quite a subtle one, but we could see where Michele has taken it from. Let's move on to the next Valentino-ism. It's the polka dots. We can see polka dots throughout Valentino's designs, big ones, small ones in different colors. Very often it's the contrast of black and white again, so we have a lot of designs with a white base and the black polka dots, or the other way around. And in his collection, Michele took up the big polka dots. We have one design with gold polka dots on black on this dress, but he also scaled them down. So we have this typical black polka dots on white, very small ones, which you can also see in the archives on dresses. It looks very romantic. And then he also took it up in this blazer that I mentioned before, where I said, oh, it looks really nice. So I think this is also another successful link. The polka dots in different interpretations, yes, it is something obvious, but let's be honest, it's actually something really nice. And when we look at this blazer with the polka dots, we can also notice the hat. Hats were also a very important part of this collection in different forms, and these referenced again the 1970s. So we have this example of this rather simple but big hat, but one hat that was a signature design element of his collection was this hat with the feather in front, and this is actually, I would say, a very exact replica or reinterpretation of a Valentino design from the 1970s. And these hats lead me to the next Valentinoism, which may be also interpreted as a Michele-ism. It's the so-called Boho chic. Very often, I said it in the introduction, people speak about Valentino and call it Boho chic. Let's leave this term aside. As I said, I'm not a big fan of it, but it is a fact that Valentino in the 1970s was heavily inspired also by other countries and cultures. This is not limited to Valentino only, it was an overall trend. And throughout history, or throughout fashion history, or also art history, other countries and cultures had a strong influence on artists and designers, and one of these phases was in the 1970s. And I think it was also this overall environment in the late 60s and 70s being open-minded, being curious, traveling became more accessible. And these are the details that you can also see here in this Michele for Valentino collection. There were a lot of details on the cuffs, also on the necklines, with embroidery or patterns that looked like they were inspired by other countries or cultures. There were designs like tassels, sometimes even the shapes of some of the garments. For example, we have these puffy trousers, which are then tighter at the ankle. We immediately get this feeling this could be something Oriental, again another term which I don't really like. I also discussed this in my video about Karl Lagerfeld, but I think you get the idea. Michele took this up. This is signature not only Valentino but also 1970s, and it is also a signature Michele design element. And this leads me to the last design element. It's the 1970s patterns. So in general we say this collection was inspired by the past, but when we think of Michele at Gucci, we remember his patterns. They were clearly 1970s inspired. Also the colors, the red tones, brown tones, sometimes this typical yellow and also sometimes blue tones. This is something that he took up again in this collection. And then a lot of people immediately dismissed it as Michele, but again, I think it's not that easy. Yes, it is Michele, but it also works because it's 1970s, it's Valentino. So again, it is a bit difficult to dissect it and only dismiss it as one of these three. And then let's quickly also look at the designs which I did not particularly like, and also I did not really understand them. They felt a bit random. Look 2, in my opinion, just looked a bit messy. The cut also in general, I'm not a big fan of purple. Maybe this is what kind of bugs me here. There may be a reference to archival purple designs by Valentino himself, so maybe there is a reason for this. And then I was look 83 and it caught my attention, not necessarily because of the garments. I looked at it and was like, is this Yves Saint Laurent? And I think it was because before that I also watched the Saint Laurent show, which was a heavy reference to the 1970s Yves Saint Laurent. The models looked like him. They also had these glasses. I don't know if it was a coincidence or if Michele knew about this. It may be the glasses. It may also even be the same model that I saw at the Saint Laurent show. It may have even been a prank by Michele after this whole Jared Leto picture. We can also assume something like this. So this was an interesting detail during the show, not necessarily because of the garments. There were 2 designs in a very special blue, which felt a bit random in the collection. Maybe this is a link that I didn't get, but I did not particularly like them, especially the short one, because I did not like the styling at all. We can establish some links to the archives. For example, this upper part may have been a link, but I found this shape a bit weird. I can't really explain it, but I felt that the upper part of the model then looked really small, or the shape was just off. And then this shape was taken up in this look 21, where I was like, this half-naked look. Obviously, one look of a collection at any designer needs to be half naked. I don't know what it is. I could live without it. There was another look incorporating lingerie, which I could also live without. I don't think it was very special. But if we criticize this, we also need to think about what did Valentino do? Because we may only remember the romantic side, this classy side of Valentino, but he also did lingerie-inspired designs in the early 2000s, like so many others. So maybe this was also this obvious reference if you look at the cut and the shape. Even if it was an archival reference, it did not really work for me. Maybe I'm too conservative or traditional. I want clothes that actually look good, and for me this just didn't work. So now you have heard my opinion about this collection. I showed you also the links to the archives. Overall, what would I say? Was he successful or not? I think it was not a bad collection. I'm not sure if it will be a collection that we will remember in a few years, but I think it's also a bit too early to judge Michele's work for Valentino. I do look forward to his work for the Haute Couture collection, because then we can also see what he's going to do. But I think it didn't turn out as bad as a lot of people made it before the actual runway show. So I think there's still a lot of potential. I think it could be something really exciting, and I'm looking forward to what's going to come. And of course, Michele's design are very different to Pierpaolo Piccoli, but I think we all expected that. I think my biggest criticism is still his styling. Sometimes I looked at the outfits, I saw some nice details, but then I saw the weird beanies and I was like, are we in Berlin? Are we going to a cafe with this dress and then we put on this weird beanie? This is something that just didn't work for me. And now, as I said in my introduction, I really look forward to our discussion. Don't be shy and let me know what you thought about this collection. Also, let me know what you think about Alessandro Michele's work at Gucci and now at Valentino. Do you think it's a successful match that he is now the creative director at Valentino, or do you not like it at all? If you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to give it a like, and if you haven't done it already, please subscribe to my channel. If you want to read more about fashion, you can also head over to thepinklookbook.com, and you can also check out my fashion label Pelagona. And if you liked this video about Valentino, you may be interested in another video that I did, which is a bit less expected because a lot of people don't know that Valentino also designed a lot of stage costumes for the opera and the ballet, and he also designed the costumes of the famous Viennese New Year's concert. So I also have a video on those costumes. Thank you very much for watching this video and see you in the next one.